In 1990, my wife and I were living in Honolulu. And for a variety of reasons, we needed a new apartment. We really needed a new apartment. We needed a cheap apartment. And as you might guess, there are no cheap apartments in Honolulu. So we hunted for an apartment all over town. We were desperate. And then finally we found an apartment that we could kind of, sort of, almost afford. So we signed a lease quick as a minute and moved in. Well, this apartment was the shabbiest apartment you've ever seen in your life. It was on the 33rd floor of the Contessa Tower, which was supposedly haunted. And the floors were carpeted with orange shag. The walls were covered with gold-flecked mirror tiles, and the ceiling light fixtures were post-lava light modern. It was obvious why it was cheap. Hugh Hefner might have decorated it in 1964. So nonetheless, we had to have a roommate. So we put an ad in the university newspaper, and almost immediately we got a response. And the responder was the most notorious person on the University of Hawaii campus. Crazy Andy. Well, we knew Crazy Andy by reputation, but we signed a lease with him anyway, sublease anyway, because we needed the money really bad right now. So Andy moved in with us, and we received reinforcement about all of the things that he was crazy, known to be crazy for. For one thing, he was a communist. And Andy never passed up the opportunity to demonstrate that he was a communist. He never passed up a forum. He stood at the front of every parade. He walked to the front of every classroom. He stood on every corner. He sought every podium to spout the sayings of Lenin and Marx and Mao. Well, another thing that made Andy kind of crazy was that he was completely covered with the densest pelt of black hair I've ever seen in my life. He was the hairiest human being in my entire life's experience. He was covered with black hair all over, except for the palms of his hands, his face, which he assiduously shaved, and the top of his head, which was bald. Now, Andy was so hairy that on Saturdays when Linda and I cleaned house, we raked the carpet, and we would make these big balls, actually more like bales, Halloween colored bales of orange shag fuzz and jet black Andy hair that would roll up on the rake. They would be too big to put in our trash can, so I would go out into the elevator foyer and drop them down the garbage chute, 33 floors to the ground floor, where they would waft their way down this garbage chute for who knows how long it took them to get down there. Now, Andy was a little sensitive about the bald spot on top of his head, so he wore a toupee. And it wasn't just any toupee, and I have no idea where he got it, but it was it's a fancy toupee called a weave. And so it's got these little black threads all the way around it on the sides. And you go to a barber, and the barber deftly carefully weaves those threads in all the way around so that your toupee stays on top of your head. Well, there's just one problem with that, and that is the hair grows out. And so the toupee gets looser and looser and looser over time, and you're supposed to go back to the barber every couple of weeks and get it tightened. But Andy was too tight to tighten his toupee. And so what would happen is this toupee would just get looser and looser and looser, and he wouldn't bother to go to the barber and get it tightened until when he did this, it slipped down over his nose and came close to suffocating him. So he was tight. Now, I want to paint a picture of Andy on campus. This is the picture that, more than his communism, this is the picture that really earned him his name, Crazy Andy. Andy drove an out of tune moped. He was too tight to tune it up. And so he'd ride around campus, no helmet, on this little moped. And it's got, and all the while, his green canvas army messenger bag with a red star on the lid is flying in the wind behind him. He's wearing his campus clothes, a muscle shirt and gym shorts with tufts of black hair sticking out all the openings. And on top of his head, fluttering in the breeze, is his weave, looking like a giant black bat. It's clutched to the side of his head and is catching a ride down the side of the road. I want you to hold that image in your mind for a minute, because, you know, I could quit right there and you'd be okay. But Linda and I knew something about Andy much weirder. We had a television, and at night we would watch McNeil Lehrer, and then we would study and read and talk and then go to bed. And after we'd been in bed maybe an hour, Andy would come creeping out of his room, silent as could be, his footsteps muffled by orange shag carpet. He would get to the living room and would sit down in front of the TV with his hand on the channel knob, because we didn't have a remote. And he would begin channel surfing. Click. Every 3 minutes or 4 minutes, click. It was as if he were an alien sampling our culture. He never watched a whole program. He never watched a whole 10 minutes of a program. He just, every 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, click, click, click. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is he's talking back. He's talking to the TV shows. He's telling them what Lenin and Marx and Mao would have said. So when McGarrett on Hawaii 5-0 arrests some guy and says, "Sorry, buddy, you're going to jail," Andy declaimed in sotto voce, "Lenin said, crime is the result of social inequity. You have to let him go." And then click, and Andy would arrive on a shopping channel, and there's this lovely lady talking about Ginsu knives and all the things you could do with a Ginsu knife. And at some point, Andy would interrupt her and say, "Marx said that when we hang the last capitalist, he'll sell us the rope." Click, and he would move on to whatever came next. And this was pretty much all it was there for a while. And then every now and then Andy would come to a station where the lines were all wavy and this way and this way, and the sound was. So Andy would just click on past that because it was not interesting. And then Andy discovered if you click past it and then back real quick, you would get 3 to 5 seconds of uninterrupted porn. And so Andy would, this is what it was like at our house. After we'd been in bed an hour, through the wall, which our headboard was right up next to the wall with the TV on it, and all night long, we would hear, "I'm under arrest. Click. And that's not all. Click. Click. Click, click. Oh, 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 oh. Click, click. Maybe let's do that again. Click. Now, this went on for several months. And then one morning I walked into the kitchen and Andy is waiting for me. He's been up all night. He is incensed. He is So I said, what's going on? And he said, you got to look at this. And I walked in and the TV was dead. Power was on, pilot light was on. In the dead center of the screen, there's a little white dot, and that's all. And he said, you're going to have to get us a new TV. And I said, well, Andy, Linda and I are moving back to the mainland in a couple of months. And, you know, we don't really need another TV, so we're going to pass. And he said, hold it. When I moved in here, there was a TV, and I watch it every day. And it's part of my life, and it's part of the apartment. I've come to expect it. We have an implicit contract that says that there's going to be a TV in this apartment because it was here when I moved in. And I said, well, you know, Andy, I don't really see it that way. Well, how do you see it? Well, I used to own a TV and it broke. Well, Andy walked away, and for the next several days, he staged a relentless campaign to persuade me that I had to go buy a TV. He left notes on my pillow, notes on the table, notes on my placemat, notes next to the sink, notes on the refrigerator door, notes where the old TV used to be, notes all over the place saying, buy a TV. And I threw them all away. And then one day on my placemat, there was a little ad on my placemat that said, cut out of the back of the Honolulu paper, and it said, color TVs used, all sizes, $100, call this number. I threw that away too. Next day, there was another ad just like it on my placemat. And I said, you know, it'd probably be worth $100 to me just to get Andy to shut that up. So I called the number and I got the address, and I went down to the sleaziest hotel on the sleazy end of Waikiki and marched up the concrete stairs to the concrete balcony, down to the door, blam, blam, blam. I could hear people moving around, but nobody came to the door. So I knocked again, blam, blam, blam. And the door swung open, and there's this really burly guy, dressed just like Andy, but nowhere near as much hair. He's got on a muscle shirt and gym shorts and flip-flops. And he says, what do you want? And I said, is this the place to buy a TV? And he stepped aside so I could step inside. And there are 3 walls of televisions. He flipped 3 switches and 3 walls of televisions all lit up. He says, give me $100. So I handed him $100, and he says, which one you want? Well, at this point, I picked a small one so I could carry it to the car. And I picked one near the top of the pile so I wouldn't have to dig down too far to get to it. And I lifted this TV off the pile, and he unplugs it, grabs the cord, loops it around my neck. And I'm walking around with this TV, and I'm having to hold it. It's 15 inches, which is kind of a big for a cathode ray tube TV. And I headed for the door, and I lowered it a little bit, and I looked on the back of this TV, and there's this twisted metal bracket where this TV had been pried off the wall of some hotel. Well, I was afraid to turn around and give it back to him, and I was pretty sure my $100 wouldn't come back. So I walked on out to the car and put it in the back and drove back to the apartment and took the TV and the elevator, the 33 floors up in the elevator, and put the TV back where the old TV used to be. And things returned to abnormal. Andy resumed his evening harangue of the TV. Click, click. Oh, click, click. Don't stop, don't. Click. And so it went. And so it went. And then the day came, the sad day, when Linda and I had to leave Hawaii and move back to the mainland. and we're packing boxes and suitcases, and I mentioned to Andy that the TV was, I was going to take the TV over to the university and put it in one of the student lounges. And he said, you can't, that TV belongs to the apartment. You bought it because it belonged to the apartment. And he went all through the stuff about the implicit contract and how it was here when he moved in, and he had to have a TV and he wasn't going to live there without one. It was an important part of his life, blah, 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 blah. I listened to that as long as I could stand it. And finally I said, I'll tell you what, Andy, I will sell you the TV. Okay. So he went back to his room and got the macadamia nut can that he kept his money in because he didn't trust banks, and comes out and pries the lid off the macadamia nut can and hands me 5 $20 bills. I said, Andy, I want another $20 bill. What? You only paid $100 for it. You want more than that? I said, Andy, you're a communist and I am a capitalist. And if Marx had had a chance, he would have explained to you that if you harangue your capitalist roommate long enough and hard enough, he will cheerfully sell you a stolen TV for a 20% markup. And that's how it went. Thank you.